Moscow has launched overnight airstrikes on Ukraine's south and east in what is believed to be revenge for an attack on the Kerch Bridge, which links, of course, Crimea and Russia.
Well, a fighter in that conflict, a former carer from Nottingham, Aiden Aslin, was fighting on the front line in Ukraine when he was captured by the Russians last April. He was tortured and sentenced to death by a kangaroo court.
Sort of a modern-day version of a blend of the SS and the Gestapo, if you read his horrifying account of what happened to him in his book. Almost a year on from being released, he's written this book about his experiences with journalist and writer John Sweeney. We're going to talk to them both in a moment. But first, here's Olivia Guthrie with a summary of Aiden's story.
We're just waiting for the command now to lay down our arms and head towards the Russian soldiers. Hopefully you'll see something from me in the future.
Aiden Aslin on the Ukrainian front line last year. He'd been fighting in the siege of Mariupol's steelworks. The British fighter was living in Ukraine with his fiancée and serving in President Zelensky's military when Russia invaded. Weeks later, his ordeal began.
If you're watching this, it means that we've surrendered.
Aiden was taken prisoner by the Russians, tortured and sentenced to death along with fellow Brit Sean Pinner. It was 5 months before they were released.
We're now out of the danger zone and we're on our way home to our families and whatnot.
The men were set free as part of a prisoner exchange helped by former Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich. Aiden was lucky to escape. While he returned home, many of his battalion remain in captivity.
Well, inspired by Aiden's story, journalist John Sweeney, an old friend of the programme, helped him write a book, having reported on the war from Ukraine since the outbreak. And Aiden joins us in the studio now, and John's waiting for us in Kyiv. But Aiden, we're going to start with you. I was reading this last night. There are details in here of your treatment in captivity by the Russians, which we simply can't go into on air because it's so horrific. But what struck me was this extraordinary dichotomy. 1 minute, you're a care worker in Nottinghamshire, taking care of autistic children, and then, not many years after, you find yourself, as I said, basically a captive of a modern-day equivalent of the SS and the Gestapo. They tortured you, they relentlessly interrogated you with extreme violence. You heard a man being beaten to death in the cell next to yours. How does a care worker from Nottinghamshire cope with that kind of unimaginable horror?
Well, it's always a question that people are going to ask, like, how do I get into that in the first place? Like back to 2015, I first went to Syria to help the Kurds fight against ISIS after seeing the injustice and the terror that ISIS had created over there. And a lot of that was down to me seeing a failure by the West in dealing with ISIS. So I just decided that I could either sit at home, complain about it, or at least go out there and do something when no one else is doing something. And then later on down the line, I looked to Ukraine to move and start a new life there. And I follow the conflict since the beginning, so I knew a lot about what was going on there, and I figured that I could at least go there and give some support with what I already know from Syria.
So you were accustomed to combat, you were accustomed to warfare and death and danger. What I'm getting at is, in the captivity that you endured for, 6 months, you were treated with utter degradation. You were caused extreme physical pain and mental agony. How did you tolerate that?
It's a hard question to ask, and especially in that situation. A lot of it was fear, not knowing what's going to happen, but also a lot of it is also just waiting to see what happens. There was times where I couldn't make any logic of what was going on, especially with the kangaroo court and the death sentence. So there wasn't really no way of me thinking logically of
there is
how
no
to cope with this.
There is, reading the accounts of your interrogations and particularly the personalities of the men who were interrogating you, they sound half mad, to be honest with you. And there seems to be no logic, as you say, in the line of questioning. It just seems to be an excuse to put the boot in and to batter you and to stab you and all of that. What did you think of them, the individuals?
The individuals, I can't like say my true words for them, but like from the people that I've met that are like a part of this like systematic chain of like torture and like oppression against like those that are in captivity, a lot of it is like systematic from the the authorities there. Like it's not just an individual case of like sadism.
But there is a lot of sadism.
Yeah, but like it's mainly in the system with the way they treat people.
Right.
Your story captured the attention of John Sweeney, who has been a war correspondent throughout this conflict for this programme and joins us in his lucky orange hat this morning from Kyiv.
And have you seen my nails, Susanna?
Yeah, you've got Ukrainian flag nails, John. Well, it's all keeping you safe at the moment, but it's getting more dangerous, isn't it, over there?
Well, most of the time Kyiv is safe, most of the time. But the other day, somebody blew up the Kerch Bridge, almost certainly the Ukrainians, but they haven't said so. That infuriated Putin, and we're waiting for a response in the capital. Other bits of the city have been hit. But only, a couple of weeks ago, there's a friend of mine, Victoria Amalina, who used to be a novelist. She became a war crimes investigator. She's actually with my normal fixer, Dima. They were sitting in the Ria pizza restaurant, and a Russian cruise missile targeted at the restaurant came in. My friend Dima, my fixer, he was okay. Victoria was mortally injured and died of head wounds a few days later. And this is what the war is like. I've known a couple of Ukrainian soldiers who I've met and who were killed later on. This is the first person who's a bit like, to be honest, like one of us, a journalist, being killed. And this wasn't a military target. This was a pizza restaurant. There were two 14-year-old girl twins who were also killed. This is where families go, where journalists go, where people hang out. And the Russians put a cruise missile in. And part of the reason I've helped Aiden write his book is simply to get across to people just how barbaric Vladimir Putin's Russia is.
That's what I want to ask you about. Until Russia invaded Ukraine, I don't think anybody expected or considered that they would commit so many war crimes. I mean, using, for example, rape as an instrument of war. The torture that is described in the book, which is just one case. What is it about modern Russia, a superpower in a civilized age in 2023, which allows them to behave, as I said, like the Nazis?
To be fair, Richard, we saw some of this in Chechnya 23 years ago, and then we saw some of this stuff in Syria. But it feels more naked and visible in Ukraine in some way. And there is a question about Vladimir Putin, obviously, and so he was a gangster brought up by gangsters, mentored by gangsters before he became a secret policeman. And what you've got is a kind of mafia state where torture and killing is just part of the system. But then my Ukrainian friends will say there is also a problem with Russia, in that Russia's imperialism is now morphing into some kind of fascism, and it is like they're not doing the Holocaust, and Nazi Germany was a thing on its own, a thing of evil on its own, but in terms of invading countries and in terms of using rape of men and women and castrating men and torture and hitting civilian targets, they are as barbaric as the Nazi army was in Eastern Europe.
John, it's horrific, and it's awful hearing details of it this morning. John, please stay safe out there, and we're always grateful for your reporting. Thank you so much. Aiden, it must have come as an enormous relief, obviously, but also a surprise that the people involved in your release were two of the most criticised and in one case, reviled individuals, Roman Abramovich and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Two people in whom, you are now in their debt, sort of thing.
Yeah.
A strange situation to be in.
Definitely for me, I'd followed what MBS did, when it broke all those years ago. However, like at the time when I was in this situation, like I remember like looking at the water bottles that the Saudis gave us, like when we were in the airport in Russia, and saw it was like Saudi bottle, and I was like thinking to myself, well, I suppose it's better than being in Russia.
Of course.
How are you now?
Mentally, I've been a lot better since I got out. Like I did struggle a lot, but like things have been getting better.
Good.
Yeah, good to see you.
Thank you.
Healthy and well. Aiden Aslin, thank you very much indeed. And the book is Putin's Prisoner, Aiden Aslin. And